Welcome to this week's video for your English project. Our focus this week is on identifying sources that will help you answer the question or problem that you're studying for your project. Let's sort of give an overview of the stages of this project. So last week you focused on forming a question. You chose a topic and a question that you wanted to answer. Look for feedback from me on your question so I can help you decide if you're a little bit maybe too narrow or too broad, so that you make sure you have a question that is appropriate and useful. Our focus now in the second week is on identifying sources, finding information that will help you answer your question. Then next week, you'll work on synthesizing information, collecting that information and comparing and contrasting it so you know what the different answers are to your question. Then we'll spend 2 weeks on drafting and revising the products you will create to share what you've learned. And then in the final 2 weeks after that, you'll share or publish what you've learned. And you'll also take an opportunity to reflect on your experience of the project and how it helped you learn about the topic, but also how it helped you develop good English language skills. So this week, as I mentioned, the focus is on identifying sources. You need to identify 2 written sources and 2 oral sources that will help you with your topic. So written sources could be things like academic articles, newspaper articles, maybe book chapters. And oral sources could be things like academic professional speeches, like a TED Talk, lectures or documentaries related to your topic, or a podcast or a news report also related to your topic. Before we get into finding sources, let's take a moment and talk about how to evaluate sources. There are many criteria we could use to determine whether a source is good or not good. But let's just focus on 2 continuums, okay? The first continuum is whether the author or the person who created the source is an expert in the topic or they're a novice. A novice means they're just learning about the topic. They don't have maybe an advanced degree in the topic. They may be interested in the topic, but they don't have a lot of background or knowledge about the topic. And so expert knows a lot, a novice does not know a lot. Then we also have another continuum here, where on one side we have opinion-based writing, where people are mostly writing from personal experience or their opinions about a topic. On the other side of the continuum, we have research-based writing. And there, in research-based writing, we tend to see things like citations. When authors write about things, they have sources that support the ideas that they share. So opinion-based writing does not usually have sources, but research-based writing has lots of sources. So we're going to evaluate now different types of sources you may encounter and place them on our grid here, so that we could see whether or not they would be appropriate for the kinds of writing that we need to do at the university level. So let's take some news articles, newspapers, news reports, maybe something you watched on TV, a news report about a topic. That tends to fit here near the middle. The people who create these sources usually know a little bit about the topic, but they're not experts. They probably don't have a graduate degree in that topic. So they're not total novices, but they're not a complete expert either. Newspaper articles tend to be based on factual information, we hope, okay? But they're not often using citations. So they're not necessarily completely opinion-based, but they're not a rigorous research-based article either. So that's why we generally put them in the middle. The advantage of news articles, newspapers, news reports is that generally the language is accessible. So they're easier to understand. You don't have to be an expert to understand it. And so that makes these kinds of sources very accessible to the public in general. And most people can understand them. Now, something that is more research-based and often written by more of an expert is a textbook. So textbooks for schools, a textbook about history or about science or about politics or geography, written by probably a university professor or a professional writer who has a degree in that topic. They often are more likely to cite different research sources, okay? But they tend to be more difficult to understand than a newspaper article. The vocabulary level and the grammatical complexity is higher. Even more difficult to read and understand are academic books and research articles that are published in journals for other researchers. So the authors here are definitely expert researchers in their topic. They have graduate degrees in that field. All of the articles have large amounts of citations throughout them, where they're connecting their ideas to other research articles and books. These are great sources for academic information, but they tend to be very difficult for non-experts to read. And so I placed them on the chart here, but you may not want to access these sources because it requires a lot of background information and a lot of advanced vocabulary knowledge to understand them. But they are the best sources for academic writing. Let's look at some others. On the other end here, where we have more opinion-based writing, we have kind of two main categories that I'm showing. One of them is the author might be an expert. They might have a degree in the topic, okay? But they're not writing for an academic audience. They're writing for the public. And so their articles or their books might be more popular, more opinion-based, maybe a little more theory-based, but they're not focusing as heavily on citations and research, okay? And these could sometimes be useful as well for academic writing, because they're certainly easier to read, usually, but they're not as academic, and so they're not as preferred. Down at the bottom there, we have many blogs or YouTube videos by people who are not experts in the topic, but maybe they have an interest in the topic. They want to share their opinion. The problem is many of these videos or articles or opinion pieces are not based on research, and so the opinions might be incorrect. And they may be sharing misinformation that could mislead people and cause people to misunderstand a topic. We definitely want to avoid these kinds of sources for academic writing. There's just too much uncertainty about them. We don't know whether the information is valuable or not. So if someone's not an expert and they're writing about just based on their personal opinions, avoid those sources. They're not a good choice. Let's talk about one other source here, this kind of big cloud in the middle, Wikipedia, okay? So Wikipedia is an amazing resource that has lots of information about many topics, very accessible by anyone who has an internet connection. There are a couple problems with Wikipedia. One, we don't know who the author is often. It could be an expert. University professors and other experts in the field will write Wikipedia articles, but we also have novice people writing Wikipedia articles. So again, they might be sharing misinformation. Wikipedia articles are supposed to have research citations, and so sometimes they really do. They're really good at that. But other times people just write their opinions and they don't cite anything on a Wikipedia article. And so that makes the article unreliable. So does that mean we have to avoid Wikipedia completely? No, we should never use Wikipedia as a source for our paper, but Wikipedia could be a location to help us find sources. So if we were to search for our topic in Wikipedia, we might find a few articles related to it. If it's a good Wikipedia article, it will have citations. And if we click on those citations at the bottom of the article, we'll see a list of the references. And some of those references might be good references that fit into the author as expert and research-based category. And so we could use those sources from the Wikipedia article as sources for us. So we would never use the Wikipedia article as a source, but Wikipedia might help us find some good sources. Now there's one more category I wanted to talk about where the author is a novice, but the author is using good research-based practices to make sure their article is connected to research. Who does this? Well, generally students, right? Students at a university are learning to be experts, but they're not yet. And they're learning to use research-based practices in their writing. And so student papers written by your classmates or other students at other universities would fit into this category. They're maybe not the best source for an academic writing, but the advantage of a student paper is that it's generally written at a level that other students can understand. So it's easier to read. But as we mentioned, the author isn't an expert. The article may not have great research-based practices in it, but that's a potential source as well. So as you look for sources, remember the 4 pieces of information we always need to collect from every source that we use. Who is the author? What's the author's name? Or if it was an organization that created this source, what's the name of the organization? What date was it published? When was the website made available? When was the book published? When was the article published? Okay. What's the title of the work? The name of the video, the name of the book, the name of the article. We need to know that. And then lastly, the publication information. Now this differs depending on the type of source. If it's a book, we want to know the name of the publishing company. If it's a journal, we want to know which periodical, which magazine did it come from. If it's a website, then we want to know the name of the website and the URL, the website address. Okay, so those are the 4 pieces of information that you're going to need to collect this week for 2 written sources and for 2 oral sources. Let's take a moment now and look at the SUU website to see how you can access good academic sources. Let me pull up that website here in a moment. What I recommend is that you log into your MySUU account. Okay, and when you do that, you will be able to easily access the SUU library. So here I've logged into the MySUU account. Okay, and if I go down here to resources, okay, there is a link called library. Now you could also just do a web search for library, SUU library, and you should be able to find it through a Google search, but it's easier to find from the MySUU page. So this is the web page for the library on the SUU campus. It's a beautiful physical place. So if you come to study in Cedar City, you might want to spend a lot of time in this library. It's a great place to study. But there you can still access the library resources when you are not on campus, if you do it through the MySUU link. It will log you in, it recognizes that you're an SUU student, so you can access all of the resources that it has. I recommend you scroll down to the bottom of the page and click on this link here called Services for Distance Learners, okay? Because you're not studying on campus, you are a distance learner, and so this will allow you to access the same things that students on campus can access. So if you're interested in looking for journals, magazines, newspapers, you could go to this database. Let's just look at that briefly and see what it looks like. Okay. What you do is you type in your topic. So let's say you are interested in learning more about genetically modified foods. Okay. And we could do a search there. And it will provide us with a variety of different sources. Okay, so here's an article about genetically modified foods, whether there's any consumer risk, maybe what people need to know about it. Okay, here's another article that talks about misinformation that people get about genetically modified foods, okay, from different websites. And there also are some videos, okay, that you could watch about it, and then lots of other articles. So you could look through and see if any of these articles relate to your research question, if your research question was related to genetically modified foods. Maybe instead your question is more about diet, right? What's a healthy diet that people should have? What kinds of foods should people be eating, okay? And here's an article that talks about different popular diets that people have and how these might affect the health of a person. And there's some others. Again, there's also some videos. Okay, so that is one way you could search for sources, is use this Academic Search Ultimate. If you're just interested in looking for oral sources, you could use the Academic Video Online, okay, archive. And when you come in there, you can do the same thing up in the search. You could search for sources. So again, if I'm maybe looking at this genetic modified organisms, GMOs, okay, I could see if there are, there's some GMO related videos here. It tells me how long the video is, the title of the video, which source it's coming from. Okay, Wall Street Journal, okay, CNN, cable news network, and how long the video is. Okay, so some of these are shorter news articles. Some of them are longer interviews or documentaries that might be an hour or more longer. Okay, so you could watch the video and see, is it good? Does it provide good information? Do I trust who the author is? Is it fairly recent? I mean, some of these are 10, 20 years old. Okay, you'd want more current information probably about your topic. And so if that matters, you might want to go up here and say, I want the newest sources first, because you want more current information. And these ones are from, the last couple of years. Okay. So that is another source that you could access. Okay, there are a few other databases as well that you could look into. Okay, there's some audiobooks and other printed, written ebooks that you could access, okay, without having to be on campus. So your goal is to find 2 written sources, 2 oral sources related to your topic that will help you answer your question. Okay. If you have any questions or problems accessing the library website and looking for those sources, let me know. Now, you're not limited to the SUU library website. If there are other sources you want to use, that's okay. You could use TED.com and look for videos by TED presenters. You could use other university websites if you want. You could even use one source if you liked, that's maybe in another language, in your native language if you like. You would just need to be able to summarize and explain that source in English. So your goal this week is to find those 4 sources, and you'll complete a form where you summarize what the sources are about. You don't have to listen or read everything, but you need to be able to write a quick summary of what the source is about, and then explain how it relates to your topic. Okay. And you'll also create a video where you reflect on your experience of finding sources and what were the easy and difficult things of finding sources. So that's your goal for this week. Again, if you have any questions as you go through this process of finding sources, please let me know. Good luck with your search.